All right, let's read the rules for the Russian campaign, original 1974 edition. This is the Compass Games re-release. I'm gonna play this with a Facebook friend. Table of contents. Introduction, components, sequence of play, movement, combat, isolation, combat supply, reinforcements, special rules, optional rules. When Barbarossa begins, all the world will hold its breath. It's a quote from Hitler. Introduction. On the 18th of December 1940, Hitler issued Führer Directive number 21, codenamed Barbarossa, which declared the Soviet Union is to be crushed in one swift campaign before the war ends with England. The Germans were confident that the victory in Russia would be swiftly won, and the risk of a prolonged two-front war would be short-lived. Losing one valuable month of good weather while his forces invaded the Balkans to bail out his fascist partner Mussolini, Hitler finally launched Operation Barbarossa on the 22nd of June 1941. Over 3 million German soldiers, most veterans of the victorious German campaigns in Poland, France, and the Balkans, launched a blitzkrieg-style invasion against 2 million Russian defenders. Wow. The initial advance was fantastic. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were taken, and before long the motorized columns were outrunning the rest of the army. As Army Group Center sped towards Moscow, Hitler decided on a change of plan. He moved Guderian's 2nd Panzer Army away from the center and ordered it to link up with Army Group South behind Kiev. This surrounding operation captured over 600,000 prisoners, but delayed the attack on Moscow by 5 weeks. These 5 weeks could not be regained, and the Germans arrived at the gates of Moscow as the winter set in. This army was not equipped for winter conditions or a prolonged campaign. The Russians, meanwhile, had called up more than 2 million trained reservists, and on the 6th of December, they counterattacked the weakened Germans and, in the next month, pushed them back from Moscow. The Germans' only real chance of victory, the short, violent campaign, was over, and the fortunes of war, as time passed, would turn more against them. In this game, the more mobile German army must strike quickly, and if the attack fails, it must conduct a mobile defense to prevent a Russian victory. It is now the 22nd of June, 1941, and in the words of Adolf Hitler, when Barbarossa begins, all the world will hold its breath. This makes me wonder if they have optional rules where you start a month earlier or, don't divert forces south to Kiev. The Russian campaign is recognized as one of the finest war games ever published and is the winner of the 1976 CSR Award. CSR, what's that? I think that's like a wargaming award. This remake of the 1974 Jedko edition presents the game as originally designed, with short, easy-to-learn rules and newly updated graphics. The Russian Campaign Original 1974 edition is a true wargaming classic that serves as a great introductory wargame. Components. Parts inventory. 1 mounted map, 22 inches by 34 inches. 1 counter sheet, half-inch size counters. 1 rulebook. 2 player aid cards. 1 initial setup display. So I'm just, while I'm reading this, I'm thinking half-inch size counters are supposed to be like as small as they get. So it's a one-map game with counters as small as they get. So it seems like there could be a lot of units. One rulebook, 2 player aid cards, 1 initial setup display, 2 6-sided dice, box, and lid. If any of these parts are missing or damaged, please contact the publisher. The map. The map portrays the vast area of the Eastern Front, where decisive operations took place. A hex grid is superimposed on the map to regulate movement and the placement of game pieces. Map scale is approximately 32 miles per hex. Terrain features printed on the map define hexes as mountain, woods, swamp, or river. A hex with no specific terrain feature, or only a small speck of terrain from an adjacent hex, is referred to as clear terrain. Other map features include major city, minor city, railroad, and oil field. Okay. The playing pieces. The cardboard counters units provided with the game represent the military forces of both sides that fought in the actual campaign. Units are primarily army and corps size. All combat units have a combat factor, representing the strength of the unit for attack and defense, and a movement factor representing the mobility of the unit. So, unit size. 2 X's is a division, 1 X is a brigade. So 1 up from a division would be a corps. So 3 X's is a corps. Nationality, I guess that's Russian. R for Russian, or R for Romanian. Oh yeah, R for Romanian. Unit type, this is mechanized infantry. Unit designations, that's the name of the unit. Combat factor is 4, movement factor is 6. It's got infantry, panzer grenadier, armor panzer, cavalry, mountain infantry, paratroop infantry, headquarters, workers, partisans. German SS, Romanian, Hungarian, Italian, Finnish, Russian. Why different shades of Russian? What do those different shades mean? Axis allies refer to Romania, Hungary, Italy, and Finland. Unit size, 3 X's is corps, 4 X's is an army, 5 X's is an army group. Game markers, turn, current turn, year, current year, impulse, current impulse, railhead, current weather, and Stuka. Reinforcements, back of counter. Turn of arrival, 1941. Color coded for year. Okay, city, Kursk, okay. So 1941 is white. 1942 is peach. 1943 is this blue color. 1944 is pink. Setup information. Baltic MD, so that's the location. MD is military district. AGN is Army Group North, Army Group Center, Army Group South. Okay. Setup. Okay. Prepare for play. An initial setup card is provided to assist with game setup. Setup information is also printed on the back side of each counter. The Russian player sets up first. Russian units are placed in any hexes inside the correct military district. Units with a city name printed on the counter must be placed in the city hex. Okay. The German player sets up second. German units and Axis allies are placed in any hexes inside the designated area for Army Group North, Army Group Center, Army Group South, and Romania. Finnish units are placed in any hex in Finland. All other units arrive as reinforcements and should be placed on the order of arrival display on the map. Arrival information is printed on the back of each counter. First impulse Axis restrictions. On the first impulse of the first turn, Army Group North must attack only the Baltic Military District, Army Group Center may only attack the Western Military District. Army Group South must attack the Kiev Military District. And Axis forces in Romania may attack either the Odessa or Kiev Military District. Finnish forces may attack from Finland. These attack requirements are also listed on the initial setup card. I would like to know the justification for these restrictions. This seems like it's done on purpose to keep it historical. But I'm wondering, like, what's the rationale for handcuffing the player like that instead of making this an optional rule? Sequence of play, right? Yeah. The Russian campaign is played in game turns representing 2 months. During each turn, players follow this sequence of play for each game turn to move units on the map and conduct combat in order to secure the objectives needed to achieve victory. Cities on the map are key objectives, and control of all cities assures victory. Okay. Sequence of play. The other thing is victory conditions. That's the thing that games really have to think a lot about, and I feel like they're sometimes imperfect. Anyway, sequence of play outline. Weather. German first impulse. Replacements, yearly. Reinforcements, 1. What does 1 mean? Is that only the first impulse or something? Yeah. Movement. Combat. Remove partisans. German second impulse. Reinforcements, movement, combat, isolation. Russian first impulse. Replacements, reinforcements, movement, paratroop, snow turn only, combat. Russian second impulse. Reinforcements, movement, combat, isolation, deploy partisans. End game turn. Okay. Detailed sequence of play. Weather. The German player rolls a die and refers to the weather chart to determine the weather condition for the turn as either clear, light mud, mud, or snow. Place the weather marker in the matching box on the map. Okay. German first impulse. The German player checks the number of Stuka aircraft available, checks the order of arrival for reinforcements, takes replacements once per year, and moves units on the map as indicated on the movement chart, including movement by rail and sea. After all movement is completed, the German player resolves all combats one at a time in any order. Okay. At the end of the German first impulse, any partisan units in the zone of control of a German unit or within 5 hexes of an SS unit are removed. 5 hexes, so at 32 miles per hex, that's 150 miles. 160 miles. German second impulse. The German player checks for reinforcements and may move units that are not in an enemy zone of control up to the maximum permitted on the movement chart. Headquarters may use their full movement factor. No Stukas, rail movement, or sea movement is allowed. After all movement is completed, all combats are resolved, and German units are checked for isolation. Russian first impulse. Conduct all activities indicated in the German first impulse, except for removing partisans. Russian replacements occur each turn, and Russian paratroop units may be used. Russian second impulse. Conduct all activities indicated in the German second impulse. At the end of the Russian second impulse, the Russian player may deploy partisan units and check Russian units for isolation. End game turn. One game turn is completed. Advance the turn marker to the next game turn. Check for the surrender of Axis allies countries. Victory conditions. To win, the German player must occupy or control every city on the map, or occupy Moscow and destroy Stalin. The Russians win by controlling or occupying every city on the map, or by occupying Berlin and destroying Hitler. So this is an interesting victory condition because there's a lot of debate about whether the Russians would have been defeated if they had lost Moscow, because a lot of people think Stalin would have just evacuated the city and retreated east and continued fighting from the east. So it's hard to, and this is an interesting thing to think about, if this is an accurate victory condition. And it would also seem to lead the player to go all in on trying to take Moscow. Anyway, movement. Units on the map move from hex to hex and pay 1 movement point for each hex or partial hex entered. The total number of movement points a unit may expend is limited to the movement factor of the unit. Units may move through hexes containing other friendly units, but may never move into a hex containing enemy units. Movement points cannot be accumulated or transferred to other units. The movement factor of a unit may be reduced by the current weather condition and is always reduced for movement in the second impulse of each turn. Refer to the movement chart at the start of each impulse to determine the movement factor available. At the start of each impulse. During the second impulse of each turn, Russian and Axis allies, cavalry and infantry type units may not move. And all German units, Axis allies Panzer and Panzer Grenadier units, and Russian armor and guards units may move using the reduced movement factor shown on the movement chart. Okay. Russian and okay, all German units. Okay, so German, it seems like German infantry can move. German allies infantry cannot move. So it's like it's basically exploitation movement is the way that it's been described elsewhere. So I guess the Russians are not able to use that with their infantry. Okay. Terrain effects on movement. All units except infantry-type units must stop and end movement if they enter a woods hex. All units except mountain units must end movement if they enter a mountain hex. All units that enter a swamp hex must stop and end movement. Note, in snow weather, all swamps are treated as clear terrain. Units may not cross a coast or lake border. Units may move across the Kerch Strait, but must end movement in the hex on the other side. Units may not cross the Kerch Strait into a hex in the zone of control of an enemy unit. Stacking. A stack refers to more than one unit occupying the same hex. A stack may contain a maximum of 2 army-size units or 3 corps-size units, or 1 army unit and 1 corps unit. Okay. Other units in the game do not affect the stacking limit and may stack freely in any hex. Headquarters, worker, partisan, Hitler, Stalin, and the SS what is that, SS Reserves unit. Friendly units can move through other friendly units and stacks without penalty. Okay, it's good to know. Zone of control. Each of the 6 hexes adjacent to a combat unit contains a zone of control. The zone of control around an enemy unit is referred to as an enemy zone of control. Partisan units do not possess a zone of control, and a zone of control does not extend across a coast or lake border, or across the Kerch Strait. Okay. Units that enter an enemy zone of control must stop and end movement for the current impulse. Units may not move directly from one enemy zone of control into another enemy zone of control. Any unit that begins the second impulse in an enemy zone of control may not move. Automatic victory. During the movement portion of an impulse, units that move adjacent to an enemy unit may attempt to eliminate the opposing unit. Total the combat factors of the attacking units and the defending units just as if conducting a normal combat. Refer to 5.1 for determining combat odds. If the attacker can achieve 10-to-1 odds or greater, the defending units are automatically eliminated and placed in the eliminated units box. Regardless of the outcome, units that took part in the combat cannot move further in the current impulse, and may not participate in any other combat in the current impulse. In the second impulse, the units may move and conduct combat normally. One Stuka unit may be used to reach 10-to-1 odds. Rail movement. Rail movement may only be used in the first impulse. The Germans may move 6 units by rail each turn. On snow turns, 3 German units may move by rail. The Russians may move 5 units by rail each turn. In addition, all replacements and reinforcements arriving in the first impulse may move by rail and do not count against the per turn limit. To move by rail, a unit must start the impulse on a rail line, may move any distance along contiguous connected rail line hexes, and end movement for the impulse on the rail line. Units may not begin a rail move in an enemy zone of control, and may not enter an enemy zone of control at any time during rail movement. Units that move by rail cannot use normal movement in the same impulse. Okay. Restrictions. Rail movement is restricted to rail lines with contiguous connected rail hexes from the east edge of the map for the Russian player or the west edge of the map for the German player. For Axis units in Finland, the rail line must be continuous from Helsinki. The German player must capture rail hexes prior to the turn they are used. The rail head markers are used to identify the most advanced Axis rail hexes. All rail hexes beyond the rail marker are Russian controlled. Okay. A partisan unit, or an enemy zone of control in a rail hex, cuts the rail line and prevents rail movement through the hex. To track units that moved by rail during the first impulse, the player may wish to rotate the unit counter. Okay. Sea movement. The Black Sea and Baltic Sea are separate areas, and sea movement is not allowed from one to the other. C movement may only be used in the first impulse. Units that use C movement cannot use rail movement or regular movement in the same impulse. The Baltic Sea, German only. One unit per turn may move from a port city to another port city, and one unit per turn may be moved from a coastal hex to a port city. Coastal hex, okay. What's a coastal hex? Each unit that moves by sea in this area must roll the die to check for survival. What is a coastal hex to a port city? Okay. On a result of 5 or 6, the unit is eliminated. Add +1 to the die roll if the unit is being moved from a coastal hex to a port. Wow, so that's really dangerous. I think that's a D6, right? Yeah. The Black Sea and Sea of Azov. Each player may move one unit per turn from a port city to another port city, or may move one unit from a coastal hex to a port city. That's what they said here, okay? Each unit that moves by sea in this area must roll the die to check for survival. On a result of 4, 5, or 6, the unit is eliminated. Subtract 1 from the result for each of the following cities that are friendly controlled: Odessa, Sevastopol, Rostov. Okay. Invasion, Black Sea, Sea of Azov. Twice per game, each side may move one unit from a friendly port city to any coastal hex on the Black Sea or Sea of Azov. The unit can conduct combat and is not subject to isolation in the current turn and the next turn. The unit used for invasion counts as the 1 unit limit on sea movement and is subject to the same sea movement die roll as other units moved by sea. Combat. During the combat portion of the current impulse, combat is mandatory between opposing forces adjacent to each other in each other's zone of control. The player conducting the impulse is the attacker, and the opposing player is the defender. The attacker selects and resolves combats in any order. All enemy units adjacent to friendly units must be attacked, and every friendly unit adjacent to an enemy unit must attack at least one enemy unit. Combats are resolved in any order provided the above requirement is met. Example: German units can attack the Russian units in 2 ways. So these are the German units, these are the Russian units. 1. Both 3-4 units can attack the 4-3 unit at 1-to-1 odds, and the 9-8 the 9-8 unit can attack the 6-5 unit at 1-to-1 odds. Okay. 2. 1-3-4 can attack the 4-3 unit at 1-to-2 odds, and the other 3-4 can combine with the 9-8 unit to attack the 6-5 at 2-to-1 odds. So one of these could attack this, and then the other one could join in the attack on this guy. So that's a corps, and that is an army. Combat procedure. For each combat, total the combat factors of all attacking units, and total the combat factors of all defending units. Compare the totals and express the result as a numerical odds ratio, attacker to defender. Round off the odds downward in favor of the defender. Okay, this is pretty standard. Example: the attacking player has a total of 10 combat factors, and the defender has a total of 4. The odds ratio is 10 to 4, 2.5 to 1. Rounding off the odds in favor of the defender means dropping the fraction and resolving the combat at 2 to 1 odds. The attacker would need 12 to 15 combat factors to achieve 3 to 1 odds. Odds greater than 7 to 1 are resolved on the 7 to 1 column. Attacks at less than 1 to 6 are not allowed. Units that are forced to attack at less than 1 to 6 odds automatically surrender and are permanently eliminated, not available for replacements. Terrain effects on combat. When adding up combat factors, consider any modifications that may apply to attacking or defending units. Units defending in a mountain or major city hex have their combat factors doubled. Units defending behind a river hex have their combat factors doubled. Hexes with only part of a river count as a river hex. Hexes with only part of a river count as a river hex, okay? Hexes containing a major city and a river are not cumulative, so the defenders are only doubled once. Units defending behind a river are doubled only if all attacking units are on river hexes. Okay. So yeah, I remember the player's aide saying that this was a little bit weird, or somebody said that this was a little bit weird. Example: if only attacking units A were attacking the defending unit D, then the defender is doubled in combat strength, since all attacking units are on river hexes. However, if A is attacking, right, got it. However, if unit X participates in the attack, then the defender is no longer doubled, since unit X does not occupy a river hex. Right. So the way this works in the Simonitch 40X series is, I think units A would all be halved in their strength, attack strength. Unit D would not be doubled because unit X is attacking, whereas if X was not attacking, D would be doubled, and all the A units would be halved. Okay. Exception. On the first impulse of the game, Russian units defending behind a river are not doubled. Okay. Combat results. After the combat odds are determined, the attacker rolls the die and finds the combat result on the appropriate odds column on the combat results table. Refer to the list of combat results and explanations listed below the CRT and implement the result immediately. Okay. Very standard. Eliminating units. When a combat result calls for eliminating units, A1, D1, exchange, the attacking player selects the attacking unit and the defending player selects the defending unit. Other results may call for the elimination of all attacking units, AE, or all defending units, DE. When units are eliminated in combat, place the unit counters in the Eliminated Units box on the map. Eliminated units are available as replacements. Units that surrender are eliminated permanently and are not available for replacements. Retreat. When combat results call for units to retreat 1 or 2 hexes, in all cases the retreat is handled by the attacker. Really? Does that mean the defender chooses the defender chooses the route of retreat the attacker chooses the route of retreat for the defender? Units may not retreat off the map into an enemy zone of control, across a lake or coast border, or into a hex in violation of the stacking limit. Okay. Terrain does not affect retreating units. A stack of retreating units may be split up by the attacker. Units defending in a woods hex ignore all retreat requirements. What is that asterisk modifying? Okay. Combat restrictions. Each unit in a stack may attack a different hex. Any number of attacking units may combine to attack a single hex, provided all of the attacking units are adjacent to the defending hex. All defending units in a hex must be attacked as one combined strength. The combat factors of individual units may never be divided between combats. Combat is not allowed across the Kerch Strait. Okay. Isolation. At the end of the second impulse, check all friendly units to see if any have become isolated. Units more than 8 hexes from a friendly controlled city or rail hex connected to a friendly controlled city are immediately eliminated. On snow turns, the distance is reduced to 4 hexes. It's amazing how similar this is to the Simonitch series. The Simonitch series is just like a more sophisticated version of this. So this might make for a great introduction or like halfway point to introduce people. Like you have them play this a bit, and then you introduce them to the Simonitch series. The path of hexes from the unit to the city, or rail hex, and the path of rail hexes to the city may not pass through an enemy unit, enemy zone of control, or enemy-controlled city. The city itself does not require a friendly controlled rail line back to the map edge. Okay. Rail hex connected to it. City itself does not require friendly controlled rail line. Wait, I'm confused. Units more than 8 hexes from a friendly controlled city or rail hex connected to a friendly controlled city. Okay. The city itself does not require a friendly controlled rail line back to that map edge. What is the justification for this? Is the idea that like they have a stockpile in the city, something like that? Or is that like a separate mechanic? Exception. Parachute units are never isolated. That's interesting. So in like the Simonitch series in Holland 44, parachute units have their own supply dump unit that they have to trace supply to. So this is like a simpler way to model it. Combat supply. General rule. Combat supply applies to Axis units located in Russian territory. I want to just check. So that supply thing, is that like a separate mechanic? Sequence supply, movement, weather for zone control, sea movement, combat. No. Okay. Combat supply. During snow turns in 1941 and the first 2 turns of 1942, all Axis units that are more than 1 hex away from a friendly controlled city have their combat factors halved. Round up. Wow, okay. Combat supplies Axis units. In the first 2 turns of 1942. During the snow turns in November and December of 1942, and the first 2 turns of 1943, Axis units that are more than 2 hexes from a friendly controlled city have their combat factors halved. Okay. So in other words, the supply situation gets a little bit better. Note, a friendly controlled city is one a player occupies, or if it is out of enemy zone of control and he was the last to occupy it or have it in his zone of control. The combat supply condition is determined at the instant of combat resolution, and therefore can change during an impulse due to results of earlier attacks. Okay. Interesting. So that's not how that works in the Simonitch series. I think the way it works in the Simonitch series is that you check once per turn to see if a unit is isolated, and if it is, you add an isolated marker to it. So you don't have to determine supply for every combat, for every unit. Reinforcements. All reinforcements enter the game as indicated on the order of arrival. Units with a specific city name are placed in the city hex. If the city is captured, the units enter on the east map edge. All other Russian units enter in any hex on the east edge of the map. German and Italian units enter the map in any hex along the west edge. Romanian units are placed in Bucharest, and Hungarian units are placed in rail hex 20.31. Units arriving in the first impulse may move normally or use rail movement. Units arriving in the second impulse must use normal movement. Special reinforcements. Exchange. In July and November 1943, 2 Panzer Grenadier units are exchanged for infantry units with the same unit designation that are on the map. If the designated units have been eliminated, choose any German infantry unit of equal combat value for the exchange. Exchanged units are removed permanently. So basically, Panzer Grenadier is a mechanized infantry, so that's infantry with the half-tracks. So basically, you're upgrading 2 infantry units to be infantry units with half-tracks. Withdraw. In May 1944, the Axis player must withdraw 2 SS Panzer Corps from units in play on the map. If SS units are not available, regular Panzer Corps units may be substituted. The units withdrawn in May return in January and February 1945. Withdraw. In March 1945 and May 1945, the German player must withdraw 1 German corps of any type from units in play on the map. Be interesting to know what the rationale is for these. I mean, obviously it's like other theaters, but it'd be interesting to know where they were going. Helsinki. If Helsinki has been captured, the Russian 14th Army enters the map on any north edge rail hex. Archangel. If Archangel has been captured, the German 36th Mountain and Dietl Mountain units enter the map on any north edge rail hex. Warsaw. Starting in 1944, if Russians are within 2 hexes of Warsaw, the 4th SS and the Hermann Göring Panzer units arrive on the west map edge. Okay, so where are they coming from? Coming from the west, Normandy. Bucharest. Starting in 1943, If Russians are within 5 hexes of Bucharest, the German 15th and 21st Mountain Units are placed in Bucharest, or may enter the map in any West Edge hex in Romania. If this occurs in 1944 or 1945, add the 91st, 97th, and 5th SS Mountain Units. Okay. I'm just curious what the rationale is for all these. Axis replacements. Once each year, starting in 1942, on the first clear weather impulse of each year, replacement units may be taken from among the units that have been eliminated. Select all replacement units available and have them arrive as reinforcements. That's interesting. To me, that would suggest that you'd want to attack with your strongest units, because this is saying that you can just keep reviving them. Axis replacement units are all SS units, all HQ, one Panzer unit for each oil field controlled by the German player, max 3. Max 3 what? Max 3 total across the whole game. One Panzer Grenadier unit. One German 3-4, one German 4-4, one German 5-4, one German mountain unit, one Italian unit, one Hungarian unit, one Romanian unit, and one Finnish unit. Place in Helsinki. What does that mean? Are these like your limits for the whole game? If the type of unit is not available, a German 3-4 infantry unit may be substituted for any German unit, except an SS unit, Axis minor ally units, Luftwaffe ground unit, or Army Group headquarters units. Okay. The Axis player receives no replacements at all in 1945. Russian replacements. At the start of the Russian first impulse every turn, total the replacement value of all worker units on the map. Select a number of eliminated units whose total combined combat factors do not exceed that total. Only one armor unit, guards or non-guards, and one guards infantry or cavalry unit may be among the rebuilt units each turn. Rebuilt units may be placed in any city containing a worker, one per city, or may enter the map in any hex along the east map edge, paying a movement cost starting with the arrival hex on the map. The worker unit that arrives in Archangel has a variable replacement value. To determine the value of this worker, roll the die and add the result to the replacement total. The value printed on the counter is used as a combat factor for defense. Okay, so you have to do that every turn. Starting on May and June 1943, the replacement value of each worker is doubled. The value used when defending remains the same. January and February 1945, the Archangel unit is removed. Special rules. Hitler and Stalin. Hitler and Stalin are leader units that represent the political leadership of their countries. Hitler and Stalin are treated the same as regular combat units and may use rail or sea movement in the German First Impulse. For movement purposes, they are not restricted by terrain and are treated the same as mountain units. Hitler and Stalin cannot be replaced. It's cool that you have like the leader units on the map. It's like the king in chess. Headquarters. Headquarters may only move in the second impulse, and unlike other units, may use their full movement factor and are not affected by the weather. Headquarters cannot use rail movement and are restricted by terrain. Stop in woods, mountain, and swamp. Okay, it's interesting they can't use rail movement. German Stuka. To simulate the effects of the German Blitzkrieg, Stukas are available to assist a ground attack. One Stuka may be added to combat to shift the odds 3 columns to the right. A 2-to-1 attack becomes a 5-to-1 attack. Wow, that's really powerful. So in the Simonitch series in Holland 44, you just get 1 column shift from the air attack, but obviously it's on a different scale. The combat must take place within 8 hexes of a German HQ, and only 1 Stuka may be operated from each HQ. Stukas can only be used during the first impulse of each turn. Number of Stukas available per turn by year. 1941, you get 3 if it's clear, 1 if it's light mud or mud, and 0 if it's snow. In 1942, you get 2, and then 1. 1943, you get 1. Okay. Stukas are not available during a snow turn. Okay. Russian workers. The number on each worker is a combat factor and a replacement value. Worker units have a zone of control and attack and defend the same as normal combat units. Workers cannot move, and if forced to retreat, they are eliminated. Worker units cannot be replaced. Interesting. So in Holland 44, you have garrison units that cannot move, and if they're forced to retreat, they're eliminated, and they have very weak combat factors. And so the garrison units and police, I think, are these kinds of weak units. Anyway, only a single worker unit is allowed in each city unless a worker unit occupies all friendly cities. Okay. Russian paratroopers. Russian paratroop units are held off map until used. During snow turns only, in the Russian First Impulse only, 1 or more of the paratroop units may be placed on the map, anywhere within 8 hexes of the Stavka HQ, not in a woods hex, mountain hex, or enemy zone of control. Paratroop units may not move during the impulse they are placed on the map, and once placed, they remain on the map until eliminated. Paratroop units can never be replaced. Okay. Option. The Russian player may use any of the paratroop units as regular infantry. On the turn of arrival, the paratroop units enter the map in any hex on the east map edge, the same as other reinforcements. Russian partisans. At the end of each Russian second impulse, all 3 partisan units are deployed or redeployed on the map, in any city or rail hex not in an enemy zone of control, and not within 5 hexes of an SS unit. At the end of the German First Impulse, any partisan in an enemy zone of control, or within 5 hexes of an SS unit, is removed from the map. Partisan units cannot be attacked or eliminated. Interesting. So you really want to position your SS units to avoid, to stop these partisans. Effect. Germans and Axis allies cannot enter a hex containing a partisan. Axis allies surrender. At the end of each game turn, check for the surrender of Axis allies countries. Hungary surrenders if 5 or more Russian units are in Hungary. Romania surrenders if Bucharest has been captured. Finland surrenders if Helsinki has been captured. If an Axis ally country surrenders, remove all corresponding units of that nationality. All future reinforcements and replacements are also ignored. Okay. Optional rules. Wow. So that's all the rules. That's yeah, this seems like a great way to ease yourself into the Simonitch games. Optional rules. The following rules appeared in later editions of the Russian campaign and are offered here as optional rules should you wish to adopt them. Axis city control. The Germans lose the game if they do not control the following number of cities at the end of their second impulse on any turn as follows. 1942. 12 major or minor cities or 8 major cities. 1943. 10 major or minor cities or 6 major cities. 1944. 7 major or minor cities or 4 major cities. Note: the German player controls at start 4 major cities and 3 minor cities, Helsinki included. This rule reinforces an aggressive stance for the German player. It forces the German player's hand to hold key geographic objectives once the initiative swings to the Russians. In effect, it models Hitler's insistence at times to hold key cities. Okay. Off-board rail movement. Off-map rail movement is allowed between rail hexes on the same map edge. The rail lines that exit and enter the map must be free of enemy zones of control, and for Axis units, free of partisans. The rail lines must be friendly controlled prior to the turn they are used. Okay. Russian artillery barrage. To simulate the major Russian offensives that were usually preceded by a massive artillery barrage, the Russian player may use artillery barrage units to increase the combat odds of an attack, in the same manner as German Stuka units. When attacking, one artillery barrage may be used in the combat to shift the attack odds 3 columns to the right. A 2-to-1 attack becomes a 5-to-1 attack. The target hex of the attack must be within 5 hexes of the Stavka headquarters unit. The artillery barrage may only be used on clear weather turns. In 1943, 1 artillery barrage is available and may be used on any clear weather turn of that year. Artillery barrage may be used twice in 1944 and twice in 1945, and on any clear weather turn of the year. Note: this rule is typically not adopted as experienced players contend the German side already faces insurmountable odds in attaining victory. Okay. Italian replacements. The Axis player receives no Italian replacements in 1943 or later. Armor attack. Armor units attacking a major city hex or woods hex have their combat factors reduced by half. Drop any fractions. Barbarossa. On the first impulse of the first turn, Axis units are free from restrictions regarding how and where they may attack. The cities of Riga, Minsk, Kiev and Odessa may be attacked normally by any Axis units able to reach them. Note, this rule will make the first phase of the campaign more challenging for the Russians, as the German player is likely to experience greater gains at the start of the conflict. Okay. Leader movement. Stalin and Hitler may only move by rail or sea, and must always be in a major or minor city hex. If forced to retreat, they are eliminated. Leadership removal. To reflect the operational impact of losing a country's leadership, the following penalty is imposed if Hitler or Stalin is eliminated. Units belonging to the country that lose their leader have a movement factor of 0 during their next impulse. Rail and sea move capabilities are not impacted. Axis minor allies may ignore this rule. Okay. Example. Hitler is eliminated during the second impulse of the Russian March-April 1944 turn. During the first impulse of May-June 1944, all German units have a movement factor of 0. Okay, got it. So yeah, that's the rest of the rules. I mean, that's pretty short. I mean, that's relatively short. So this is going to be exciting to try. It's really only 10 pages of rules and then 1 page of optional rules. So this is like a great way to introduce yourself to the Simonitch system. Play this first a bunch and then try out the Simonitch system. So yeah, very, very cool.